It's going live. All right, here we are, guys, live on YouTube. For today's episode, Chris and I are going to talk about the Iceman. So let's get to it. Welcome back to
is being recorded.
Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. In the last couple of episodes, Chris and I talked about the real history and background of mobsters Richard the Iceman Kuklinski, Roy DeMeo, and his famous crew. Today, we're going to talk about the 2012 film based on these events, The Iceman, starring Michael Shannon, Winona Ryder, Ray Liotta, and more. So I really want to share a quick comment from our last YouTube live stream from one Wolfgang Schmuck. That's a great YouTube name. So he says the guy on the right has the most perfect, clean looking mustache I've ever seen. And that person is right. And he's none other than our own Chris. And since we are on a mafia roll, Chris will now be known as Mustache Chris in honor of the Mustache Pete's we've been talking so much about. Mustache, how you doing?
Oh, doing good. I'm pretty like the rest of my friends and family like make jokes about the mustache. I've had it for so long now. I'm just gonna keep it. I'm never getting rid of it. And apparently somebody else pointed out that I look like Chris Rosenberg, and then we were just looking at a picture and I was like, yeah, it's actually a little bit uncanny. Like his hair is longer and stuff like that, but I mean, I see it in the eyes and then the mustache. I mean, there is definitely some similarity there.
Wait, when did Chris Rosenberg die and when were you born? Are you Chris Rosenberg reincarnated, maybe? I don't know. It'll be for the people to decide. Now, this
Yeah.
movie's The Iceman. I have to say, I watched it probably more or less when it came out and I liked it. This movie has so grown on me to maybe it's one of my favorite mob movies of all time because I wouldn't say just overall, it's not the most accurate movie I've ever seen, but it really captures something about the times, about Richard Kuklinski, and about what else was going on in the New York mafia scene in the 70s and the 80s. What did you think in your first couple of watches of this movie?
Like you, when it first came out, I watched it right away because I heard about Richard Kuklinski and then Michael Shannon. I've always enjoyed his acting, so I watched it and I enjoyed it. And I knew a little bit about Roy DeMeo and like a little bit of the history, but not a ton. But like since doing like the two kind of deep dive background episodes and really reading about that particular area and time period of the mob, I've like yourself, I actually kind of appreciate this movie more than I did before, which is I've heard opposite. I've heard the opposite from people where they read more about Richard and they're like, "Oh, this movie doesn't do it properly." And well, I mean, we'll get into that a little bit later. I think like you pointed out and me and you were talking earlier in the week, it really captures the whole feel of that era that you get from when you do some research into because it's a very particular era of the mob, especially like the DeMeo and Koglinski, like even location of like where they were doing a lot of their work. It's a very particular feel to it, and I believe the movie captures it really well.
Yeah, we'll get into we'll talk about some of the scenes that we really enjoyed and talk a little bit about the historical accuracy of it. But I think people will see that even though some things weren't exactly historically correct and they changed some names and they did some weird stuff with the timing, it really was each scene was something that Richard Kuklinski talked about or that had actually happened.
Yeah.
So let's maybe talk a little bit about some of those details that were changed right off the bat. If we look at the some of the main characters, so Michael Shannon played Richard Kuklinski, Winona Ryder played Richard's wife. They called her Deborah, but her real name was Barbara Kuklinski. And I think she might be the first person to talk about, because I think she really nailed something with Barbara Kuklinski. You can watch some interviews she did on some shows in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And sh I think she captured something so specific about and so accurately about Barbara Kuklinski. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree with that too. Winona Ryder really captures that kind of working class, like homeless. Not, I'm trying to. What's the word I'm thinking of? Like that working class. Like she's working class, but she's very wholesome.
Yeah. I think
That's the
she
best way I can describe it.
I think she also you you get through her acting and several of the scenes that she knows there's something up with Richard, but she's willing to turn a blind eye to it. And I think that that's what I really got from the real Barbara. She knew somewhere deep inside of her. Obviously, she knew Richard had a hair trigger temper and he would trash the place. But I think she intrinsically knew that there was something way darker to Richard than even what she saw in the house.
Yeah, and it you see it right at like the first scene with them when they're on their first date. She notices he's got a Reaper tattoo on his hand, and says, "Oh, I had this one back in the day. I was trying to look tough." And you get a sense that she's attracted to it because she probably is attracted to the tough guy, the bad boy, the reformed bad boy. I know it's a cliche, but it's the truth. In actuality, the tattoo wasn't a Grim Reaper. It was come it was a tattoo that him and this gang that he when he was pretty young the Coming Up Roses gang, they all got the same tattoo in the hand. um but I mean, the Grim Reaper serves the same purpose.
Now the I think it's probably good we talk about the Gemini crew of Ray Liotta playing Roy DeMeo, James Frank or not James Franco, he'll come in later, but David Schwimmer playing, they called him Josh Rosenthal, but he was really representing Chris Rosenberg, and then Robert Davi playing Leo Merckx, but who was actually Anthony Gaggi, Nino Gaggi. And I think there was something about each one of those that so masterfully just absolutely grabbed who they were supposed to be, especially Ray Liotta. I've been saying this for weeks that we've been talking about this. Roy DeMeo was the role Ray Liotta was born to play.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, and just watching this movie, going and doing the back research for the Roy DeMeo episode, it just makes me want to go. It's terrible to think that we're never gonna get a Ray Liotta, Roy DeMeo movie because it would have been perfect. Yeah, he was born to play this role, and I mean, I this might be a little because he doesn't have like a ton of screen time in the movie, but if you had somebody else playing Roy DeMeo, I just don't think the movie would have worked as well because you need somebody with the same kind of intensity that Michael Shannon has to play off back and forth off each other because, reading the movie that seemed to I mean, reading for the movie that seemed to kind of be the relationship that Roy DeMeo and Richard had in real life, according to Richard, depends on who you believe, but yeah, there was like a certain level of intensity between the two of them.
Then the the interplay of Chris Rosenberg, Josh Rosenthal, and Roy, uh, I thought that they got that really well too. I know some people criticize that it seemed that they played down Chris's role, but I think that they really got something with that. In that David Schwimmer looked close in age to Ray Liotta. I don't know how close they are in actuality. They're probably fairly close in age. And Chris Rosenberg was just a little bit younger than Roy, but they really had a father-son relationship.
Yeah, and David Schwimmer is just as an actor, I thought was a perfect choice to play Chris Rosenberg. I know that sounds kind of crazy because he's like the guy from Friends, but when you read Chris Rosenberg, he comes across as a guy that's tries really hard to not be what he is, which is like a Jewish guy. Like tries really hard to be really Italian, and it comes across when you read it that he comes across almost as like a try hard.
Yeah.
And David Schwimmer plays that type of role. That was basically the role that he played on Friends, and it comes across perfectly in this movie.
But you get to see him as this brutal killer too. Like Chris
Yeah.
Rosenberg had absolutely no problem killing people. And
Oh
I
no,
and didn't you
he
get
was
that?
the
I think that came through with David Schwimmer.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and like Chris Rosenberg was like his well, I don't know, we won't get into it. It's pretty graphic, but yeah, you definitely get that sense with David Schwimmer in this movie, but when he shoots out the two coke dealers, right? You see the ruthlessness there. For sure. But I would have liked to have seen more of them in the movie, but I mean, there's time constraints but yeah, I thought David hit it out of the park.
And then I loved Robert Davi as Nino Gaggi, even though his role was tinier and smaller than even Ray Liotta's or David Schwimmer's. I think he captured something of the pompousness and maybe the foolishness of Nino Gaggi, like the pettiness, how pompous
Yeah.
and petty Nino was. I think Robert Davi really grabbed that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't really know why they didn't use Nino Gaggi's name. I assume it probably some legal stuff, like maybe descendants of like Gaggi or something to threaten to sue, and that's why they use Leo Marx. It's probably I would assume it has something to do with that. Yeah, he really does capture just like the pettiness of Nino and the cheapness, and there's a couple scenes that illustrate that. And this is the thing with this movie, like we pointed out, like yeah, it's not historically accurate in some ways, but it captures everything that you need to know about like Nino Gaggi, like in terms of not wanting to pay for work that he said he was going to pay for, and like the pettiness. Some guy, they get into a little, scuffle or what have you, and then he hires a hitman to go kill him. That's something Nino would do. We know that because Nino ends up killing that boxer that he got into a fist fight with. Like 12 years later, he's still steaming about it, just like pettiness over a broken nose.
And then the last one I think we have to mention is Chris Evans. He played Robert Mr. Softy Prongay, and they called him Mr. Freezy in the movie. That might have been because Mr. Softy is a trademarked name. I didn't know, I had never seen much with Chris Evans, but he captured magnificently the craziness of Robert Prongay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess he's most famous for playing like Captain America, right? And like the All-American boy. And I mean, he plays that really well because he kind of does look like the part. But it, he, I'm totally surprised at just how well he did, Robert Prong. I didn't even know it was Chris Evans when I first watched the movie, but then upon multiple viewings, I realized it was him. And in researching the movie, and he based off what Richard told us about Robert Prongay, Chris Evans, yeah, hits it out of the park. Like he captures that craziness that Robert Prongay was.
Let's take it. So I mean, the acting was really out of this world, and we didn't even. I guess we should mention Michael Shannon as Richard Kuklinski. I think one thing that you had mentioned. What did you think about? You mentioned earlier, just talking now that you thought you loved the intensity he brought, but you didn't feel that he brought the physicality of Richard Kuklinski.
No, I like the intensity for sure. But when you see pictures of Richard Kuklinski and you read about people describing Richard Kuklinski, he is like literally a monster, right? Like he's 6'5", over 300 pounds. And I mean, Michael Shannon's pretty tall, but he doesn't look like he's over 300 pounds in this movie. And I mean, that to me, that's like a little nitpicking thing, I guess, because how many actors are you going to be able to find that would match like the talent of Michael Shannon and the intensity and plus be 6'5", 300 plus pounds? There's not many actors that probably out there that you could hire to pull it off. But that's one little thing I would have liked. I would have liked a guy that was more physically intimidating.
Yeah, I looked up Michael Shannon. He's tall. I think he's well over 6 feet tall, but he's thin. Even when they showed him in the movie, like up next to Winona Ryder, he was much taller than her, but he didn't physically dominate her. And or even Ray Liotta as Roy DeMeo, like standing next to him, he was tall, but he didn't physically just completely dwarf these people like he did. I think I even noticed one of the scenes, he was clearly wearing lifts to make himself a little tall, probably to make him look a little taller. I mean, they look like 70s shoes too, so it could have been just that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just my I don't know. That's one that would have been like something they could have done maybe differently, but then it's not that big of a deal. I think Michael Shannon did the role very well. So,
Let's talk about a couple of those individual scenes that really stuck with us. What's maybe one scene that really stuck with you?
I mean, I would say like the scene in the porn lab between Richard and Ray, because according to Richard, this is kind of the way he met sorry, Richard and Roy DeMeo. This is kind of how they met. Was Richard was working at this porn lab, and I think there was, if I'm remembering correctly, there was some problem with I don't know, there wasn't the shipment wasn't going to make out on time. And Roy just smacks him around a bit. And according to Richard, like he said to himself, like he swore revenge. He was going to get revenge on Roy for ever putting his hands on him. And it just really captured the intensity of Richard and the intensity of Roy. And you have like these two, you know, psychotic guys staring each other down. It was perfect. And it kind of shows like the stuff that Richard and Roy were into. We didn't really get into it so much in the background episodes, but like Roy was funding a ton of this pornography that was going around in the United States at the time. And wasn't a lot of it wasn't just like normal pornography. There was some pretty vile stuff that we they were shipping around, and Richard was right into it too. And it's yeah, so I don't know, to me, that was one of the better scenes in the movie.
I liked the scene, and it really, I think it got to me, and I think I didn't really understand it when I saw it, and I probably didn't even understand it the last couple of times I watching it. I was just watching it today, and it hit me, that scene where Richard meets with his brother Joseph in the prison. And that's the scene where I think we get the real hint of Richard's childhood. That's something that they don't show at all in the movie, except for one 5-second flashback in that scene. And it really gets dropped after that. But I think that for me, that's what made me think that this movie, you really need to know the story of Richard Kuklinski going into it, or else I think you can go on a kind of a false narrative. And I don't know if that's what the filmmakers were trying to get, is to get, they built this narrative of Richard being like the typical classical family man who maybe starts to fall apart, where Richard had all this background before he even met Barbara, which if you go back to the previous episodes, you'll hear. And that one scene gave us a little taste of that.
A little yeah, and it was something that we didn't get into on the Richard podcast too, is that that's accurate. His brother was murdered, I believe it was young lady, and he was in jail for that. And in the Iceman Philip Carlo book, you hear about Richard talks about like trying to help. He was trying to help his brother, and they were actually pretty close. And then after his brother Joseph did that, he kind of cut him off. And that's what you see in that scene is Richard basically just saying like never call again. Like it's completely done. Um, but the one thing I really liked about that scene is his brother screaming at him, saying, like, "You're gonna wind up in here with me," and that's exactly what happened. I think he was a few cell blocks away from his brother when
Yeah.
he was finally caught.
Then I think it was the very next scene after that, or maybe it was a little bit longer down when Richard Kuklinski gets into that road rage incident.
Yeah,
And I think you see who the real Richard Kuklinski was, that whole facade, and even the facade that the movie puts up, that he's the all-American family man, dad of the year, and then he goes on this insane road rage. That's who Richard was,
yeah.
100%.
And then if you in the Iceman like documentaries and the books, he talks about like just going on these freak road rages, and I mean that's pretty accurate to what Richard did in real life. He says he killed a few of these people that he went on road rages with, but I mean it shows you that this is something that triggers Richard off is certain road rage episodes.
Were there any other scenes that really stuck out to you?
Um, I like the like so when Roy DeMeo hires Richard to be his personal like side special assassin or what have you. Like me particularly, I don't think that's exactly how their relationship was, but let's just say in the movie this is how they show it. They do a montage of Richard doing a bunch of jobs for Roy, and a lot of the killing that he does in that montage is killings that we hear about in the Philip Carlo book. Like I like that touch. So it's not historically accurate how all those killings went down or what have you, but we get he uses like the rope in one scene, and there was like a couple of other ones, and I just liked it because I don't know, it was a certain attention to detail, and they changed things a little bit, but I mean it is accurate in spirit.
One scene that they switched around is I think it was in both of the books, the two major books on Richard Kuklinski. He said that Roy pulled an Uzi on him at the Gemini and was probably going to kill Richard, but Richard was so ice cold, like he didn't move, and uh he didn't give that fear factor back to Roy that Roy was really looking for. And they kind of showed that in the car scene where Roy pulls a gun on Richard. And that scene they never really talked about in any of the books, but I think that was kind of a mashup of scenes to just show like how ice cold Richard Kuklinski was, that even somebody like as psychotic as Roy DeMeo couldn't shake him.
Yeah, that's what when we talked about it earlier is like that's something that the movie did particularly well was changing the scene a bit to make it the movie flow a little bit better, but still capturing the spirit like historically accurate, right? Rich like Roy pulling out the Uzi as you pointed out. Yeah, they changed it a little bit, but they kind of recreated it in a sense that made more sense in the movie.
The movie really got me thinking. And this, I wanted to bump this theory off of you is, so we in that first Richard Kuklinski episode, the background episode, we really came to the conclusion that we thought he was full of it. But I wonder if the way the timeline works out, if you look at it, Richard's doing really, really well up until the early 80s. And then Roy DeMeo dies in 83, I think it was, somewhere in thereabouts. And it's really after 83, and when you get into the mid 90s, that Richard really started screwing up. And I wonder if maybe there is some truth that Richard, maybe he was not an international hitman assassin. I mean, I think that's preposterous, and I think that that's stuff that Richard pulled out later just to get people going. And especially his last interviewer, I think maybe he was doing that just because he knew they would eat that up. That's preposterous. But what do you think that about Richard was earning under Roy? And once Roy died, that's when it really fell apart, because Richard then had to make his own criminal enterprises after that.
Well, that and it would Rich that was his connection to like hit contracts, right? I guess. And Roy was kind of his personal capo. Um I yeah, I can totally I can see it. I personally think that like I think Roy was doing hits for the mob. I think he did special jobs for I think he did some special jobs for Roy, or Roy at the very least pointed people in Richard Kuklinski's direction if he didn't really want much to do with them, and word got around. I That's what I personally think. Um, and I guess when he saw Roy go down, maybe he started thinking to himself, well, I mean, if they can take Roy out, then it's only a matter of time for me. And maybe subconsciously he starts getting sloppier, because knowing that he'll get caught, at least in prison, he'll be somewhat safe.
Yeah,
I was thinking about this afternoon, so
it's also that it could be that after Roy was killed, that Richard and everybody associated with Roy was such damaged goods, he couldn't just go work for John Gotti or for the Westies or for else and make the kind of money that he was making through Roy. And so he had to push himself way further than he really was ever comfortable with. And I think he had been stealing cars and stuff, but it was all such sloppy stuff.
yeah.
I think because he had, in all the books, they say that he spent money faster than it came in. And once that Roy money dried up, and they kind of show that in the movie too, where Roy says everybody has to stop doing everything, and he essentially laid off Richard, that's when Richard started getting really sloppy because he
Yeah.
had to earn.
Yeah, he had to earn, and then it's also implied in the movie that like he had this urge to kill. Like that was one of the things. It's like, oh, I'm really good at what I do, and it's like, yeah, part of it's like this is how I make my living, but part of it is if I can't kill people, then I I'm gonna start taking it out on my family and what have you, and you kind of see it in the movie where he freaks out. In real life, this happened a lot more often, but I mean, in the movie, he freaks out, and that's when he comes to, oh, I'm gonna reach out to Robert Pronge, and we're gonna start doing jobs on the side, because I think it was implying that he couldn't hold these urges back anymore, and he had to you know unleash them somehow, and he also had to start making some coin.
Yeah, I think well, that's another thing that the movie shows. It's this whole thing with Robert Pronge, and how much of it, how much of the things that he did with Robert Pronge do you believe? Especially what they showed in this movie. They show him as they almost have an industrial freezing setup going, and that they're both just doing one contract after another. And I don't get that that was really what they were doing.
I mean, from my understanding, they did kind of work together, did they not? And they like shared tricks of the trade. They bring up the cyanide spray, which is apparent according to Richard. Robert Pronge is the one who taught him that trick, and I mean, he talks about it on the tapes that they where he I don't know, they used it as evidence against him in the court case or whatever, the wiretap. He talks about like the cyanide spray. I mean, and we talked about Robert Pronge, like they did find a guy who was like shot up near inside his ice cream truck, and he was an arsonist and like sounded like a pretty insane person. I mean, I would I think this part's accurate. Like, I mean, to me, a lot of it hinges like Richard's story hinges on Robert Pronge. Like, I wish we could have known a bit more about the guy because it just seems if he had made it up, like the whole Robert Pronge thing, if he made it up, I mean, what a waste. He should have been a novelist.
It's true. One thing that they did with Robert Pronge is the whole discussion that they had that Robert or Richard and Robert had about Robert wanting to devise this plan where they kill each other's families, and Richard kills him there, but then he leaves him on the bench. I think the real Robert Pronge, if I'm not mistaken, was found shot in his Mr. Softy truck.
Yeah, he was shot. Yeah, he was saw that's where they found him, was that he was shot up in, I believe it was in his truck or it was in his shop where his truck was parked. But the his idea of killing each other's families, according to Richard, that was that was the thing that Richard decided, oh, this guy's like is so crazy, I'm gonna have to take care of him myself. I mean, in Robert Pronge's defense, I mean, in a weird kind of twisted way, the logic makes a bit of sense. Richard's not going to want to do that to his own family, and Robert's not going to want to do that to his own family. So, I mean, why not use each other's, skill set?
I mean, it really is something that's almost from like a novel, a spy novel that a really high end special forces guy becomes a Mr. Softy truck driver so that he can just scope out neighborhoods without being noticed so that he could be a hitman. Like it's so insane that it has to be true.
It really, that's what I mean. Like, it seems like if Richard made that all up, like, what a waste. He should have been a film director, a novelist, write comic books, something,
Yeah, he would have made
because
millions.
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Because I can only imagine the type of stories that he could come up with in his head. And we're supposed to believe that like Richard just kind of stumbled across this Robert Pronge's murder in like some obscure newspaper, and put all this story together that with the ice cream truck, and this is what he was actually doing. I mean, I don't know, man. It seems pretty far-fetched. Maybe Richard exaggerated a bit of what Robert Pronge was doing, maybe, but I don't know. He must have been a hitman, and Richard must have known him, and they must have done some work together.
Now, what were some things that I mean, I think in general, I really like this movie. But I had some things to nitpick it. What were some things that you didn't love so much about this movie?
Um, to be, to be honest with you, like they played up too much Richard being like the perfect family man, and like trying to set that like dichotomy between the two. I mean, in the early interviews, he does present that kind of picture. In the later interviews, he starts being a little bit more honest, and I'm like, but even Barbara talks a little bit more about what actually happened. It almost seemed like in the movie it was just convenient. It's like we're just going to use the first couple of interviews, and then we're just not going to we'll deal with some aspects of the later interviews, but the first couple of interviews is a much more compelling story, so we're just going to go with that. I mean, this is where people kind of have like a serious problem with the movie because it presents this false picture of Richard Kuglinski where he was able to just keep his ruthlessness as like a business, and he was a nice family guy when he came home, and it's just not true. He was, well, you guys know from listening to the earlier Richard Kuklinski episode, he was a monster to everyone around him.
Yeah, that was the one thing that it made a really compelling narrative arc for a movie, that he was a family man who just kind of cracked once the stress came on too much. But I mean, this guy really was a monster. Barbara knew it. Barbara kept the son away from, which they cut out entirely, the son, which it didn't really matter. But she really tried to insulate. I think the son's name was Joseph, if I'm not mistaken. But she tried to insulate him from Richard as much as possible, because she was worried that Richard would become jealous of the son and try and take him out, or abuse him. And that's not necessarily portrayed at all in the movie, that this that really vindictive and jealous side of Richard.
No, it's not at all. And I mean, somewhat in defense of the filmmaker, if you read the Philip Carlo book, I mean, I don't know, like, what type of male lead do you have to deal with there? I mean, they still capture that Richard was completely ruthless, and I mean, they show him killing that homeless person for no particular reason, and killing that guy at the pool hall because he, made a joke about his wife, or, not his wife at the time, his girlfriend or what have you. And I, like, so they show that he's a serial killer, really. But you know, we're not going to get into all the details about the Carlo book, but I mean, how would you depict that? Like, I don't know, I'm asking you, like, how would
Yeah,
you
you
do it? I
really
don't think you could
can't.
do it.
You can't do it in that format. I think in a movie, you can't. I think it's too difficult to show those two different sides of Richard, that he more or less was a normal family man,
Yeah.
more or less. I mean, he was absolutely violent and all that stuff. But you got to also remember that this was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I think some of that domestic abuse sort of thing that he did was a lot more common that in suburbia, if you will, not to the extremes that Richard took it. But I think that if a cop came to that scene, I don't think that he would haul off the person. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But and the fact that, on the other hand, that Richard Kuklinski was a mafia hitman serial killer, it's too hard to jam all that together in a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, and it's just there's just literally nothing to like about Richard after reading the Carlo book too. Like, I don't know, there's nothing to like, at least, like, but this movie you can walk away from, and obviously Richard's despicable and an evil person, but you can walk away and go, like, you can think to yourself, well, this guy was kind of a badass, right? He was a hitman for the mob. Do you know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
But they almost, some people say they try to make him seem sympathetic. I don't really think the film does that. I don't know. What's your opinion?
I I think sympathetic might be too far. I think they're trying to turn him into an anti-hero, I think, to some degree, when he's just rotten to the core. The I
Yeah.
think he tr- in the I think you're I agree with you. In the later interviews, he did a lot more to turn himself into the anti-hero than even what he did when he was in his earlier story. But he wasn't that at all.
No, there's nothing remotely heroic about Richard at all. I mean, you can walk away even after reading the Carlo book and go, I mean, at the end of the day, the guy's kind of a badass. Like, he was doing hits for the mob, and he was, unlike a lot of these other serial killers, he was actually killing tough guys, and guys that could probably, compete with him in terms of physically and what have you. I mean, you could walk away thinking that. I know I did. Um, but there's nothing, there's at no you don't wanna sit and talk to Richard, I don't know, maybe I would if he was still alive just to kinda understand the guy a little bit better, but, um, yeah, there's nothing like you wouldn't want there's at no point do you go to yourself, it's like, "Oh, man, I wish I had Richard as a friend."
No, no. I think then that leads us kinda to the end of what we could do to make this movie better, and I think that we'll get into one. We'll set aside the obvious one for a minute. I think anybody who's really watched this movie and followed Richard Kuklinski, there's one obvious thing that they could do. But I think that one scene I would have loved to have seen them include was it was in one of the Iceman tapes. I think it was the earlier one. Richard explained this hit he did on I think it was his friend even, and it was at some sort of nightclub, like 70s nightclub, and everybody's dancing disco and everything. And Richard dressed up in the most outrageous disco outfit he could find. And so this 6'5", 300-pound guy, he says he danced and shimmied all through this disco. And then he got up to the guy, and the guy recognized him. But before he could do anything, Richard blew cyanide in his face. And they showed something of that scene, didn't they, in the movie?
Yeah, like Leo Merckx, Nino Gaggi hires Richard to kill Sicoli, who's the henchman that Roy's with, which is I don't understand why they didn't just use like Joseph Testa or Anthony Center. Um, and he goes into the club and he does the cyanide spray kill in the nightclub, but he's not wearing like they should have I don't understand it. Why wouldn't they just have him put on that crazy suit and just recreate that scene? Um
Yeah, Richard, he just explains it so well, and he gives you such mental imagery, and the movie just fell completely flat on that one.
Yeah, I guess maybe they tried filming it with the crazy disco suit, and they're like, no, we just can't do this. It looks ridiculous. It just takes you right out of the scene. Maybe that's their logic, but I mean, if you're gonna watch a movie about the Iceman, I don't know. Most people would probably go in there thinking, knowing a little bit about the guy, I guess, right? I would have just filmed it with the crazy suit on it because that's part of Richard's story is him wearing these crazy suits and like disguises and
Yeah.
he it sounds like he had like a whole room just full of disguises with like fake noses and wigs and different suits and
Now, I think and I'll leave it to you. What would you love to have seen them do with this movie?
I to be honest with you, I would have me and you were talking earlier. I would have liked to have done like a mini series, to be honest with you, where you have Roy DeMeo's and Richard's story running parallel. Because we were mentioning it earlier, I would have loved to have seen Ray Liotta do the Roy DeMeo story, but I also would have loved to have seen Richard's story, running parallel to Roy's because they're connected, but they're not connected and they're connected enough that and they are around they're at the same time that you could tell Richard's story and you can tell Roy's story and be like, we're spending 20 minutes here and then 20 minutes there and there's episode 1 and do I don't know, like a 5-part mini series where you show the entirety of Roy's story and the entirety of Richard's story and I think it would have worked really well.
They could have really played it up too because Roy was almost in competition with John Gotti. There was all that was going on pretty much in parallel too. I mean, to have the Gotti story, the Roy story with Richard Kuklinski in there, and all the stuff with Neil Delacroce and uh, Nino Gaggi, all of that bouncing off of each other. I think that's the story that really needs to be told. And unfortunately, Ray Liotta can't do it because I mean that's one of the I think one of the things where we'll all have to live with is that Ray Liotta couldn't play Roy DeMeo more.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to do it now, who would you have play Roy? Just out of curiosity.
I can't think, especially once Ray Liotta played him, I don't think anybody. I think that's just an idea that'll never happen.
Yeah, the only person I can think of off the top of my head, I know it sounds weird because he's not really Italian, is Tom Hardy because
Yeah,
he has that certain level of intensity.
but still, I think Ray Liotta, I mean, he was just the king of the mafia movie, and it, it just, I don't think it would end just out of respect for Ray Liotta. I think it's done now.
Yeah, it's just the more I think about this mini series and the two stories running parallel, like, oh my God, it would have been brilliant.
I think that that might be something that comes back around because we're kind of in a low spot of mafia movies. There was a lot of them in the 90s, the early 2000s, and that genre is lost popularity a little bit. I think when it comes back around, I think we'll see some good things come out that maybe like that.
Yeah, and well, we need a new crop of actors too to be able to play some of these roles. A lot of these guys are, they're dying now. Ray passed away, I believe. It was Paul Sorvino who passed away recently.
Yeah.
I mean, Martin Scorsese's not getting any younger. Um, I mean, neither is Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro. Like these are old men. We need a new crop of mob guys.
Yeah. I think it's maybe a genre that'll be revisited and viewed in a different way too. I think that this this Iceman movie in a way was kind of a throwback to an earlier kind of movie, kind of like what I mean, we haven't talked about it yet, and we probably will. The Irishman was a throwback movie, but I think we need something new out of the mob genre.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like the Irishman was kind of like Martin Scorsese's swan song to the whole mob genre, which I mean, really, I wouldn't say built his career on it, but it was a huge part of his career. I don't see him doing another mob movie. I don't see any of those guys ever doing another mob movie. That was like their farewell, and we're gonna end up doing that movie, but it was quite well done. But yeah, we need, I don't know, something. Yeah, we need somebody. We need some different actors. We need some fresh blood into the genre.
So we'll leave it at that for today. As always, if there's movies that you think that we have to talk about or certain characters, I think everybody knows some of the big names that we'll have to hit, and we'll definitely get into those. But if there's some more offbeat things or maybe some movies that aren't exactly in the genre but are interesting, definitely send us emails about them. We'd love to hear them.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, I had a blast doing this little, I guess, mini series within a series. Just kind of, just diving deep into the Roy DeMeo, Richard Kuklinski's world. I mean, a lot of people probably wouldn't think it was fun to, research these guys considering how grimy and disgusting they were. But I mean, they were a lot of fun to research. And I mean, it's crazy. Like, it sounds crazy, but like Roy sounds like he was a pretty funny, like his whole crew, like me and you were talking about it earlier, in an odd kind of way, they're funny. And
Also, if people are liking what they're hearing, definitely leave us a rating and review on iTunes and check out the website, and you can subscribe to the podcast there. So tell your friends about these live streams, click like and all of that stuff, and we will talk to you next time. And let's see, do we have some comments? We have Dirk who wrote Ice Ice Baby. Uh if there's anybody else who has comments out there, if not, we will talk to you next time.
yeah, see you guys. Like, share, do all of that.
All right. And we'll talk to you probably on some upcoming Wednesdays.